started. You ready, Colleen?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. I want to say, first of all, I'd like to say hello and welcome to all of you for joining our webinar today. My name is Louise Binder, and I'm the co-chair of the Access to Treatment and Innovation Oncology Network, ACTION, which is a group of oncology organizations dedicated to enhancing access to treatments for oncology patients, and co-sponsor of this webinar with my esteemed colleague, Colleen McMillan, from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada. And she'll introduce herself in more detail in a minute. So for the past 8 years, I have also been the health policy consultant for Save Your Skin Foundation, which is a national patient-led not-for-profit group dedicated to the fight against non-melanoma skin cancers, melanoma, and ocular melanoma through nationwide education, advocacy, and awareness initiatives. My role there is to inform the development of health policy and systemic treatment access practices across Canada from an oncology patient perspective. I started my work in this area in the HIV community in the mid-1990s after my own diagnosis and before there was treatments for HIV. There, I co-founded the Canadian Treatment Action Council in 1996, and we were successful in ensuring access to treatments and quality care for people with HIV by working with governments and other relevant interested parties to enhance drug review, drug pricing, and access to liver transplants for people with HIV. Colleen and I developed this webinar as part of a series that both introduces new members of the patient community to topics that are basic to doing work in the health policy and practice fields, and as a refresher for those of you in the field for some time, as things change rapidly, and it never hurts to catch up. This is the second webinar in our series. We've presented a webinar on Advocacy 101, and we plan to do other topics related to health policy over the fall. Today, we dive into the complex world of health systems, and particularly those related to drug reviews for sale and for reimbursement in Canada. It's an overview of these systems as they are today. We will follow with a webinar taking a deeper dive into the health technology assessment process, including the development of a patient submission to the health technology assessment body, Canada's Drug Agency, and we'll describe that agency shortly in our webinar. So with that, over to you, Colleen.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, everyone. So if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, I'm Colleen McMillan. I'm the Advocacy Lead at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada, or LLSC for short. I come to this work as a career advocate with a background in social service and community-based support, and I'm deeply committed to health equity and person-centered care. At LLSC, I have the privilege of working closely with people affected by blood cancers, their care partners, and healthcare professionals. A big part of my role is listening to their experiences, understanding their needs, and making sure their voices are heard by decision makers. I also work directly within Canada's health systems, especially when it comes to the drug approval and reimbursement process. I lead LLSC submissions to HTA bodies, which we're about to dive into, and I advocate for timely, equitable access to innovative treatments. At the heart of everything I do and everything we do as an advocacy team at LLSC, it all goes toward our goal of getting the right treatment to the right person at the right time, no matter where they live. And I'm excited to share how you can be part of this work too, if you aren't already, because there is strength in numbers. And when more voices come together, we have a greater impact on the decisions that shape access to care. So with that, let's get started. And we'll start out with a land acknowledgement. Oh, I'm so sorry. I seem to be having a technical issue with my slides. I'm so
Would you like
sorry.
me to read it out,
If you
Colleen?
wouldn't mind, that would be great. I can't see a thing. So go
Okay.
on without me, and I hope to catch up.
Well, that's why we're partners, right?
Exactly.
As we gather virtually today, we acknowledge that we're meeting in the traditional lands of Indigenous people across what is known as Canada. This land has been home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities for thousands of years. We honor their long-standing relationship with these territories, which continue to this day. We recognize the ongoing stewardship of the land by Indigenous peoples and the importance of acknowledging the histories, cultures, and contributions of the original caretakers of these lands. We invite everyone to reflect on the land they are joining from and to engage in our collective journey of reconciliation. And if you wish to put anything in the chat as to where you're joining us from, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you so much for picking that up, Louise. Much appreciate your partnership there. I'm still having difficulties, but I am able to move forward. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll start out with our objectives. Perfect. So our objectives in this session are to understand how cancer drugs move from approval to patient access, to identify key decision makers and access gaps, and to learn where and how patient advocacy could influence outcomes. For our agenda, we'll go through some housekeeping items. We'll talk about key players and federal roles in drug access and pricing. We'll go through health technology assessment and patient engagement and what that looks like within that process. We'll talk about the role of the PCPA, the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, and provincial decision-making. We'll touch on the private payer landscape, and we'll also talk about some access challenges, things like financial toxicities, delays in access, and social determinants of health. And we'll go through some housekeeping items, starting with participation. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let everyone know your name and your organization if you belong to one. We intend for this to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to use that chat. Throughout the session, there will be opportunities for you to participate in interactive components. However, we do have to be mindful of our time because we do have a really packed agenda. So we'll be moving through these in a timely manner. We're fortunate to have Jasmine and Laura from Save Your Skin Foundation with us today for tech support and moderating. So thank you so much to both of you for that. If we have any time left at the end and an opportunity arises, we may have some time for discussion, but really we'll have to monitor and see how that goes. I also want to mention that due to the size of the group today, we may not be able to hear from everyone who wants to contribute. However, please know that we truly value your input. We encourage you to share your thoughts and questions via the chat, and feel free, like I said, to interact with each other throughout the session. Louise and I will be reading anything that goes into the chat, so we will see all of that. As far as muting and unmuting, as with any virtual presentation, please remember to keep your microphones muted to help reduce background noise throughout the presentation, and just unmute yourself if the opportunity does arise and you're called on to speak. Please note this session is being recorded for future reference. The recording will be sent out to all registrants afterward, so we want to ensure everyone is aware of that. And additionally, please be mindful of confidentiality. So if you're participating in conversations, even within the chat, try to avoid sharing personal details like names to maintain privacy. If you have any questions, comments, or need further support after the webinar, Louise and I will provide our contact information at the end, and we're both happy to hear from you. And while we're excited to engage with you today, we want to clarify that neither Louise nor I are healthcare professionals or policymakers. The information that we're sharing in this webinar is intended for general educational purposes only and reflects our personal experiences and understanding of the Canadian healthcare and drug reimbursement landscape. We encourage you to consult qualified professionals for guidance specific to your situation. So with that, we will get started with a word cloud. So if you're able to, you have a phone and you're able to scan that QR code to get to the word cloud, that is great. If not, I'm about to copy and paste the link into the chat here. So you can just select the link. And the question we want you to answer is, what words come to mind when you think about drug access in Canada? So just throw a few words up there and we'll be able to take a look at that. If you're not able to access the word cloud, feel free to also just put your words in the chat.
Colleen, it says on our end that the word cloud, like on slide, hasn't been opened, so we can't actually input anything as
Oh,
participants.
thank you for that. Jasmine, are you able to open the word cloud possibly? We do have some words coming through in the chat, so I'll read some of those out. Complex, slow, inequity, red tape, insurance, complicated, opaque. That's a good one. Inconsistent, very slow, fragmented, confusing. And then again, we have insurance. So I think we'll just work on making sure that our second word cloud, because we do have another one later in the session, that one will be good to go. And then we'll just move on to the next slide. So keep putting your answers in the chat. Thank you so much. So for this one, I'm going to pass the reins over to Louise.
Thank you. I thought we'd start out by just taking a bird's eye view at the whole system. And don't worry about understanding what's in each of these boxes. I promise you that we're going to go through each of them one by one and explain their role as we go along. But I just, to your point, to all of your points about complexity and confusion, I think just looking at this diagram shows you how complex a system we have. So just as a reminder, we start out with drug development. So somebody's done some research and they've done a clinical trial and they believe that they have a drug that would be good for Canadians to have. Usually that drug development takes somewhere between 7 and 10 years. So if the clinical trials are successful and the manufacturer wishes to sell the drug in Canada, they give the file to Health Canada to review, and they have to give all their complex scientific data and clinical data that they have in order for Health Canada to review it. If Health Canada decides that it can be sold in Canada, it then goes to two places at the same time. It goes down to another federal body. Health Canada is the first federal body it goes to, and then the second federal body it goes to is the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board. It also, at the same time, goes to health technology assessment bodies. So first, let's talk about the so first, let's take a bird's eye view of the Canada Health Act and what is the role of the Canada Health Act in being an umbrella under which all of these agencies are principles that they're supposed to follow. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see that the Canada Health Act, the next slide, it sets out the 5 principles of Canada's healthcare system. And I want you to ask yourself the question as we go through each of these, whether you believe that these principles are actually in practice in Canada in implementing our healthcare system. You can probably guess my answer already. So let's start with public administration. So supposedly healthcare insurance must be publicly administered by a nonprofit organization. It must have comprehensiveness. That means it covers all medically necessary services, including doctor's visits and hospital care. It has universality. That is, all residents must be covered equally. It has portability. Coverage is maintained even when moving between provinces. And accessibility. That is, residents must have reasonable access to healthcare without financial or other barriers. So I would again ask you to think about, in your experience of our healthcare system, are we really meeting these key 5 principles? I would suggest that we aren't. Now, I would point out that one of the things missing from this list is actually drug coverage. And so drug coverage is actually taken over and administered by the provinces. There is funding for it that goes through health transfers to the provinces, but they in fact administer it. And we're going to talk about the pan-Canadian provincial role in providing these services shortly. But we start with our allegedly key principles of our healthcare system. So what about each of these systems? And I'm first going to turn over to Colleen, who's going to talk about the Health Canada and its role.
Thanks, Louise. So yeah, getting started with Health Canada, their role is to make sure that the drugs and medical devices we use in Canada are safe and effective. One part of their role is that Health Canada oversees clinical trials, which are the studies that test new drugs on people to make sure they're safe and they work before they hit the market. And before any drug or treatment can be sold in Canada, it has to go through a careful review process where Health Canada checks to make sure it works, it's safe to use, and it meets quality standards under the Food and Drugs Act. But their job doesn't stop once a drug is approved. Health Canada keeps monitoring it after it's on the market using programs like Vanessa's Law and Jordan's Principle. Oh, sorry, can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. So yeah, sorry about that. Health Canada keeps monitoring it after it's on the market through these programs, Vanessa's Law and Jordan's Principle, to catch any safety issues that might come up later. They also help decide how drugs are sold. So whether you need a prescription for something, if you can get it from a pharmacist, or if you can just buy it off the drugstore shelf. And Health Canada also helps set the rules that protect new drug inventions. So when a company creates a new drug, they spend years and a lot of money researching and testing it. So to make sure that they can earn back those costs, Health Canada gives them a period of data protection. So what this means is that no one else can copy their research to make a generic version of the drug for a certain number of years. It's usually 8 years. And there are also certificates of supplementary protection, which Health Canada can give to extend that time and give the company up to 2 extra years of protection if Health Canada's approval process has been a little bit slower. But Health Canada also works to balance this protection with public access. So once that time is up, other companies can make affordable versions, which helps to keep drug prices down and improves access to treatment for Canadians. Health Canada also works with international partners, to speed up access to certain promising new drugs. And one example of this is Project Orbis, which is led by the US FDA's Oncology Center of Excellence. And through this initiative, Health Canada joins regulators from 6 other countries to review cancer therapies together all at the same time. And this kind of collaboration helps bring innovative cancer treatments to Canadian patients faster without compromising the safety or effectiveness. And it really is working. Project Orbis has been a great addition to the approval process and has helped to speed up access to new therapies that might have otherwise taken longer to reach patients. Next slide, please. So we'll talk about NOCs, or Notice of Compliance. So when a drug is approved in Canada, Health Canada issues a Notice of Compliance, which means the drug meets the necessary safety, efficacy, and quality standards, again, under the Food and Drugs Act. And this whole process can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years for Health Canada to review all the required information before they decide to issue an NOC. And once the NOC is granted, it means the drug is approved for use in humans under the Act. And for the next slide, I'll pass it back over to Louise.
Thank you. So Health Canada recognized in the 1990s that NOCs were taking too long for people who had very serious and life-threatening diseases. And so they brought in a policy called the Notice of Compliance with Conditions. And it is it is issued conditionally with the requirement that the sponsor conduct further studies to confirm clinical trials. And they will actually review these drugs and get them to people within 200 calendar days. So which drugs are considered to be under this NOCC process? They're serious, life-threatening, or severely debilitating illnesses or conditions for which there is substantial evidence of clinical effectiveness, that the drug provides effective treatment, prevention, or diagnosis of a disease or condition for which no drug is presently marketed in Canada, or a significant increase in efficacy and or a significant decrease in risk, such that the overall benefit risk profile is improved over existing therapies, preventatives, or diagnostic agents for a disease or condition that is not adequately managed by a drug marketed in Canada. So it's very important that there is a recognition that when you're dealing with serious and life-threatening diseases, we cannot wait for the normal notice of compliance conditions, and we need to speed up the review at the Health Canada level. So that's that review, and that's as we've said, that's a federal government agency, Health Canada. Then we move to another federal agency in the system that we need to be assured of, and that is through the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board. So if you can pass the Health Canada test, a manufacturer also then has to pass the Patented Medicine Prices Review test. And if we look at the next slide, you can see that what this federal agency does is it regulates patented drug prices to prevent excessive pricing under the Patent Act. So this is not for generic drugs. This is for drugs that have a patent. And what this agency does is it's empowered to determine whether a patented medicine is being sold at an excessive price in any Canadian market. And to do that, they look at what's called the PMPRB 11, and that's a group of comparable countries which they reference in terms of the pricing that those countries are providing for the drug. And Canada cannot sell the drug at a price higher than those countries. So these are these international benchmarks. But as I've said, at this, the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board can take really as long as it wishes to make that decision, and it doesn't hold up the next processes that take place with regard to patented medicines being provided through access to reimbursement in the public sphere. Now, there are a few other federal pieces of legislation that I just want to mention. One that I think most of you would have heard about is the PharmaCare Act, which was which is enacted in the year 2024. There are four main features to this legislation. One, and perhaps the most important for us at this time, is that the intention is to provide universal drug coverage with a goal to establish a national, universal, single-payer system, and it's from first dollar coverage. So to start the process going, the Canada's drug agency is charged with contraceptives and diabetes medications as a starting point. And the way they do this is that it's really administered through the provinces, and the federal government gives money to the provinces, and they indeed ensure that this piece of the legislation is implemented. There are other things that this legislation intends to do. One of them is to develop a national formulary, which they call a list of approved medications. It also plans to implement a bulk purchasing strategy to reduce drug costs and to create a pan-Canadian strategy to promote appropriate drug use. And we're going to talk about these in detail in a few moments. So So we know that we already have in place two drugs that are being administered through this legislation. And as I've said, another thing that's promised in this legislation is the development of an essential prescription drug list. And in fact, the Canada's Drug Agency has been charged with developing that list, and they have, in fact, developed a draft list, which is out for written consultation, which I hope all of you will look at and submit your responses to it. And the submission time for that consultation is July 18th, 2025. Some of us are already developing submissions, and just so you're aware, if those of you who are interested in looking at the submissions that we're developing, and indeed even joining in with us in those submissions, you're welcome to do so. The other thing that they're also consulting on is the third arm of this legislation, which is the national bulk purchasing strategy. So this is a strategy for national bulk purchasing of prescriptions and related products. Now, there's a couple of things about this. There really isn't bulk purchasing in Canada. The federal government doesn't bulk purchase, and in fact, even the provinces don't do that. What they do is actually reimburse. So this is a bit of a misnomer, and in the draft submission, the consultation that's been put out under this part of the legislation, there's a recognition that in fact, it's not so much about bulk purchasing as ensuring that we get the best prices for the drugs that are being reimbursed in Canada. So the submission deadline for this submission is August 1st, 2025. And I hope that you'll take a look at that as well and consider either your own submission or joining in with others who are submitting a submission to this process. So now we move from the federal jurisdiction. The only other thing I would just mention is that we also do have a rare disease framework. And this was put in place in 2023 to develop a list of drugs that would be paid for by the federal government for rare diseases. As of 2025, all of the provinces have signed on to this agreement, and there have been 12 drugs that have been determined to be included in this list, and the provinces make their own decisions about which of them to cover. There are 3 cancer drugs which are on this list, and the provinces, as I say, make their decisions about which of these they wish to cover under this rare disease framework. So let's leave the federal government for a moment, and let's move over to the pan-Canadian environment. And Colleen, it's over to you for this.
Sure, thanks, Louise. So pan-Canadian health technology assessment roles in drug access. So that's quite a mouthful. Let's take a minute to break it down. So first of all, what does pan-Canadian actually mean? In this context, it refers to a coordinated national approach that involves the provinces and the territories working together to evaluate and manage drug access across the country. So it doesn't mean a single national system. It really just means it's a collaborative effort. So now what's the health technology assessment part, or HTA? So HTA is the process used to evaluate the value of a drug or a health technology to help inform decisions about whether or not it should be covered or paid for by the public health plans in Canada. And in Canada, there are 2 main players responsible for this process. There's Canada's Drug Agency, or the CDA, which handles HTA for 9 provinces and the territories. And then there's INESS, which is Quebec's own health technology assessment body. And while they do similar work, there are some key differences between them. For example, the CDA includes input from individual patients, patient organizations, and clinicians as part of the review process, making sure to bring those real-world experiences into the decision-making. ANESS, on the other hand, does not currently include individual patient input the same way. They do look at patient group input and clinician input. So even though we have a pan-Canadian approach, there are some important differences in how HTA is done across the country, and that can affect how drug access decisions are made in different regions. So CDA and ANESS, let's look at their drug review mandates. So as mentioned, both the CDA and ANESS are involved in health technology assessment, or HTA. So basically that means they both look at how effective and how cost efficient health products are, like drugs, devices, and also diagnostic tools. They do in-depth reviews of medications, which look at both the clinical evidence, so how well the drug works, and also the economic side, whether it's worth the cost. From there, they make recommendations on whether these drugs should be publicly funded, meaning if they should be covered by government health plans. They also help develop clinical guidelines, which are kind of like roadmaps that outline the best ways for healthcare providers to diagnose and treat and care for their patients. Another big part of their work is making sure medications are used properly, which means encouraging smart, safe, and cost-effective prescribing. They support decision makers like governments and health organizations by giving them solid information to guide their policies. And finally, they really value transparency and getting input from a wide range of people. So they talk to healthcare professionals, patients, caregivers, patient organizations to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. So for our second word cloud, we're asking the question, what word comes to mind when you think of value of a drug? So what really gives a drug value? I'm gonna put the link in the chat. If this word cloud doesn't pick up for us, just keep putting your answers in the chat. We will take the answers from this word cloud and the previous word cloud and put them together, and then we'll send them to everyone later on with the feedback form after the session. What gives a drug value? So we've got quality of life and patient outcomes. Absolutely. Efficacy. And our word cloud looks like it's good to go. So hopefully we have some answers coming in there as well. Perfect. All kinds of answers coming in. Extension of life. Patient outcomes. Harm reduction. Access. Love to see it. Okay, please keep those responses coming. We will take a screenshot of the word cloud, like I said, and we'll send that out after the session. And thanks for participating. In the interest of time, I think we'll move on to our next slide. And for that, I will pass it over to Louise.
Thanks, Colleen. So now we're getting into the detail of how the processes used by Canada's drug agency and the pathways available for drugs to be reviewed for value through this agency. And there are three parts to this process. One is what's called proportionate reviews, and I'm going to talk about each of those in some detail. Deliberations after the reviews have been done, and what they call a report refresh, which leads to a final recommendation. So let's go to the first of these three, which is proportionate reviews. This is very important. A drug comes to HTA for review, to Canada's Drug Agency for review. The first decision is which of these pathways into which of these pathways should this drug be put? And there are three different definitions for these pathways that need to be in, and the manufacturer needs to make a decision as to which of these they wish to apply to in order to have their drug reviewed. So if we start to look at these definitions on our next slide, we can see that a standard review is a normal review, what we would call an average review. So there are drugs in this class on the market already. This is another drug in a particular class, and the manufacturer recognizes that it will use the normal review process, which takes about up to 180 days for an analysis by Canada's Drug Agency. Then there are what are called tailored reviews. So this is a different pathway. And this is a pathway for simple, low-risk files, including PACEs, which we'll talk about in a minute, and so that they can be done quickly, and they take about approximately 100 to 120 days. And one of the reasons that they are more expedited is because instead of a whole committee looking at this file, it's actually done through a subcommittee, and then the final committee just makes approves what the subcommittee has suggested. So PACEs is pharmaceuticals with anticipated comparable efficacy and safety as a drug already on the market. So that's really what this tailored review is for. It's kind of for the second in class, if you like. And it's a very good process. It's new. It's quite new to Canada's Drug Agency, and there haven't been too many drugs through this yet, but hopefully this is going to speed up drugs that are required through this process. There's also, under the tailored review, something called a product variation tailored review. And that's where there's a new combination to the product or a new formulation of an existing product. And again, this is speeded up through this subcommittee process instead of a full committee process. Now we'll go to the most complicated of these three, and I don't mean to use a pun there, but it really is the most complex of the three processes, and it's the complex review process. So if we look at the next slide, you'll see that there are 5 situations in which a complex review is undertaken. The first, and I think fairly obvious one, is where this is a first drug approved in a therapeutic class. So there are no drugs available before this drug in the therapeutic class. The second is a priority drug review with the potential to alter existing treatment paradigms. So this is a very important change. There may be something on the market already for this disease or illness, but this is going to really be a paradigm shift in the way this disease or condition is treated. And so it's considered a complex review. Now, then there are 3 other areas in which a complex review takes place. The third of these is where the primary endpoints are novel surrogate outcomes. So what are surrogate outcomes? A surrogate outcome is a measure used in a clinical trial as a substitute for a traditional clinical endpoint, which is overall survival or quality of life. So that's generally what is looked for as a result of a clinical trial, is overall survival or quality of life. But in some cases, we can use what are called surrogate markers for those outcomes. And examples of those include tumor response or progression-free survival, and these can be measured more quickly, potentially speeding up drug development and approval for reimbursement. Now, these are useful, but they are not universally accepted, and often there's the argument that they aren't a perfect reflection of the ultimate clinical benefit for patients, but they are in fact starting to be accepted, and that certainly is going to help speed up the access to treatments for patients in these situations. The fourth is tumor agnostic or histologically independent therapies. Now, what are these? These are also called tissue agnostic therapies. So what that means is there's a new class of cancer treatments that target not a specific area in the body, but actually a specific genetic mutation in the cancer cell, regardless of where the cancer cell's origin is in the body. So these therapies represent a shift from traditional cancer treatments that are defined by the location of the tumor in the body, and that receives a complex review as well. And the fifth is a review where additional evidence for an application that doesn't meet any of the existing criteria from 1 to 4, but are important evidentiary patterns to be analyzed by the reviewers. Now, one of the interesting things, one of the many interesting things about complex reviews is that for the first and second types of complex reviews, there's a new process that the Canada's Drug Agency has put in place. While submissions are, as Colleen mentioned earlier, CDA accepts submissions from patients, patient organizations. In this instance, they will also accept actually and invite a person with lived experience to come to provide evidence in person or by video if they wish, under whether it's a first drug in a therapeutic class or a priority review that is going to really change a treatment paradigm. And that's a really important addition because it gives an opportunity for a person to really describe either why they need this treatment or how this treatment has changed their outcomes or quality of life. And I think all of us on this call would agree that there's nothing like having somebody in front of you describing exactly what this treatment has done for them and why they need it. It's just a different perspective and a very important one. And we're very pleased that Canada's Drug Agency has decided to include this in their complex review process. So Colleen, would you like to talk a bit about the mandates to the method under Canada's drug review?
Absolutely. Thank you, Louise. So we talked about the CDA's mandate. Now, this slide gives us a big picture view of the CDA's method. So how they make decisions about new treatments or health technologies. These are the main areas they look at, kind of like a checklist to make sure they're seeing the full picture. So first, there's clinical value. This is all about how much a treatment actually helps people. So how much does it improve their health, their quality of life? And then next we have unmet clinical need. And this asks, is the condition serious? Are current treatments just not cutting it? If people are still getting really sick or even dying, even with available options, that's a red flag. Then there's social and ethical considerations. And this goes beyond the medical side. It's really about understanding the real life impact. So things like mental health, cultural needs, and logistical challenges, like whether someone is able to get to the treatment easily. And then they look at economic considerations, and this piece is more about value for money. So, how much does the treatment cost compared to what we get out of it? And how does that stack up against other options? And then finally, impacts on the health system. So, even if a treatment is great, can the system actually deliver it? Do we have the people or the equipment or the funding to actually make it happen smoothly? And a key point here, patient perspectives are woven into every one of these areas. So the experiences, the values, and the needs of the affected community are absolutely central to how these decisions are made. I also need to talk about something really important in these reviews, which are QALYs. If you haven't heard of QALYs, that stands for Quality Adjusted Life Years. And a QALY is a way to measure both how long someone might live with a treatment and also how good that life might be. So it combines quantity and quality of life into a single number. And these are extremely important in decision making because they help determine whether a treatment is considered to be worth funding or covering. So the higher the quality, the more a treatment is considered to improve both life expectancy and quality of life. So next we'll look at these advisory bodies that Louise touched on. So let's take some time to go through these. So there's FMEC and PERC. And what do? So both committees review drugs, but they focus on different types. FMEC, which stands for Formulary Management Expert Committee, reviews cancer drugs and non-cancer drugs that are already on the market, but are being looked at for new uses or cost effectiveness. And then PERC, or the P-Coder Expert Review Committee, reviews cancer drugs only. And these are new drugs or new uses for existing cancer treatments. And who starts these reviews? So the process also differs in how reviews are initiated. For FMAC, reviews are requested by federal, provincial, or territorial plans and not by drug companies. But for PERC, the drug companies apply directly and submit their evidence for review. As for committee members, both committees are pan-Canadian advisory bodies, and they're made up of health professionals, health economists, patient members, and an ethicist on the committee. And as far as patient engagement or how patients are involved in their processes, so patient involvement is a key part of both processes. For both, patient groups can submit input and provide feedback on draft recommendations. Each committee includes a voting patient member on the committee. And starting in April 2025, for certain complex reviews, a person with lived experience, or a PWLE, will be invited to speak directly to both committees and answer questions about their experience. FMAC began doing this and they're a pilot project that started in 2023. As far as establishment, that's when FMAC was established. PERC was established and has been part of the process since 2011. And again, just as far as the drugs they review, FMAC reviews cancer and non-cancer drugs, and PERC focuses on cancer drugs only. So understanding the differences between these two committees really helps to clarify how the decisions are made and also where patient voices can really make an impact. So now we've got a poll. So the question in the poll is, have you ever participated in the CDA's patient input submission process? Have you ever been a part of this process? And there are some, there's the poll popping up right now. And you can select one of the answers and we'll just see what kind of experience we have in the room. Give that a few more seconds and we'll take a look at the results. I feel like we should have the Jeopardy music playing right now. Has everybody had a chance to put their answers in? Are we able to show the poll? Amazing. There's our poll results. So 31% has said that they've submitted input on behalf of their patient organization. 4% provided input to a patient organization that submitted it. We really thank you for that. Sometimes it's difficult to find those voices. So thank you on behalf of all of us for that. And then we have 65% have not participated in a submission. Well, we're so glad you're here. And learning all about this process and where your voice can make a real difference. So thank you so much for being here. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So if you answered that you haven't participated in the CDA's patient input submission process before, don't worry. Hopefully after today, you'll feel more confident and maybe even inspired to get involved. So let me walk you through how the process works and how your voice or your group's voice can be a part of these incredibly important reviews. So there are two main ways that patients can contribute to HTA reviews: through written submissions and in some case through oral submissions, like Louise mentioned earlier. For written submissions, the input window is open for 35 business days from the start of the review. So during this time, patients and patient groups can share insights about what it's like to live with the condition and what matters most to their community. So this is our chance to really make sure that real world experiences are part of the decision-making process. And oral submissions are available in select more complex reviews. In these reviews, people with lived experience can present their perspectives either live or through a pre-recorded video. And if you're participating this way, you'll also need to attend a live Q&A session with the expert review committee, even if you have recorded your input via video. So what should you share? What kind of information is helpful to include in these submissions? What are you going to want to write or talk about? So the committees are really looking at these areas here. We've got disease experience. So what symptoms did people face? How does the condition affect daily life and overall quality of life? And also, what does diagnosis look like? How easy is it or difficult is it to get a diagnosis for this condition? And then current treatments. What is it like using the treatments that are currently available? Are they effective? Are they effective enough? Are there side effects? And then improved outcomes. What improvements would you like to see in new treatments? What would make a meaningful difference for you? And experience with the drug under review. If you or someone in your community has used the drug being reviewed, how does it compare to what is already available? This kind of input is just completely invaluable. I can't stress it enough. It really helps to ensure that decisions aren't just based on numbers, but also based on real human experiences. And then we'll talk about report refresh, CDA's recommendation stage. So once the CDA has completed a review of a drug or a health technology, they move into what's called a report refresh stage. This is essentially the recommendation phase of the process. So at this point, the CDA will issue a draft recommendation. This is their upfront initial opinion on whether the treatment should be publicly covered for Canadians. Once that draft is released, there is a 10-day business day, I should stress, a 10 business day window where interested parties, so patients and patient groups, clinicians, and also manufacturers can provide feedback on the recommendation. So this is a chance to respond to the draft recommendation, clarify any points, or submit additional information that might influence the final decision. And finally, after reviewing all the feedback, the CDA then will issue a final recommendation, which is shared with the public, and it's used by drug plans to help guide these coverage decisions.
So Colleen, we have one clarification question, and that is, can you clarify for written submissions if patients must provide input through a patient group and not on their own?
That's a really great question. So thank you for asking. It's important to clarify that. So with the CDA, which again is doing drug reviews for the entire country with the exception of Quebec, they will accept input from individual patients as well as patient organizations. For a NES, you do have to be part of a recognized patient organization to give input, and that is for Quebec only. So thanks for asking that. Okay, perfect. So we have a comment saying, thank you. This was unclear on the CDA site. So I'm glad that we were able to clear that up. That's why we're here today. So perfect. So now we'll look at the types of recommendations. After those HTA submissions are evaluated and they give that final recommendation, what could that recommendation be? What does it mean? What will it say? So first there's a do not reimburse. So this means that the drug didn't show enough benefit. Either it's not better than what's already available or it costs more without offering any additional benefits. The next type of recommendation is reimburse. So this is essentially the green light. The drug is effective, the price is in line with or lower than existing treatments. But I'll be honest, this one's pretty rare because most drugs are quite costly and do end up needing a price reduction before they can be covered. And then there's reimburse with conditions, which is much more common. In this case, the drug looks promising, it has clinical value, but the price may just be too high. So the recommendation can be for the PCPA, which we'll get into more in a little bit, to negotiate a more affordable price. And sometimes instead of a pricing issue, the CDA might need more time to collect real world data to confirm the drug safety and effectiveness outside of clinical trials. So in that case, they'll also issue a reimburse with conditions. So as you can see, it's really not just about whether the drug works. The cost and the real world use do play a big part in reimbursement decisions. And now I'll pass it over to Louise again.
Thank you. Just before we go to this slide, I want to give a shout out to Canada's Drug Agency, which I rarely do. Those of you who know me know that I rarely do. But in this case, I'm very pleased to see that they recently added to their deliberative framework social and ethical considerations, because that has been an INESS addition for a long time, and we're really glad to see that Canada's Drug Agency is taking that on board. So I just thought I might I might take a moment to give them a shout out for that. In addition to all of the processes that we've discussed already, the tailored reviews, the complex reviews, the standard reviews, the deliberation processes, in addition to in an attempt to accelerate their processes, CDA has put into place a few other pathways. One of them is called Target Zero, and that is a commitment by CDA to endeavor to reach 0 days delay from when Health Canada approves a drug to when HTA makes its recommendations. So basically what it's saying is that they're going to be concurrent. They're going to do their analysis concurrent with Health Canada. Now, they haven't met that target yet, but it certainly is a valuable part of the process that they're endeavoring to do. And we certainly hope that they reach that target. It will save a lot of time in terms of getting to patient access. Another thing they've put in place is something called time-limited recommendations. And this provides early access for promising therapies with limited evidence, basically at the phase 2 level of clinical trials. But there has to be a commitment that there will be a phase 3 trial in order to get access at this point to a CDA review. So it's a time-bound approval, and as phase 3 evidence matures, they come back and they reassess their CDA reassesses its original decision about the drug. And again, this also can help to speed up access through this pathway. I've mentioned PACES. It's the streamlined review, and it's new. It's a streamlined review for simple, low-risk drugs, and that are expected to have similar safety and efficacy to effectiveness to existing treatments. And the other thing that they've recently put into place, which I'm pleased to see, is something called rolling reviews. So until rolling reviews were put in place quite recently, a manufacturer had to wait until it had all of its evidence start to finish before it could apply to Canada's Drug Agency to be reviewed. Now, what they're allowing the manufacturers to do is to put the evidence in that they have as it becomes available, so that CDA can look at that evidence, and by the time the last of the evidence comes in, they're already very well aware of what's in the file, and that saves a lot of time. So I'm very pleased to see that addition as well. There are other ways that, other than the submission process, that patients can become involved with Canada's Drug Agency. And on the next slide, I'm mentioning a few. One of them is to join the Patient and Community Advisory Committee, which provides general information about patient reflections on Canada's Drug Agency's work. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to the submissions on the listing and the bulk purchasing, you can also put submissions in on consultations regarding policy and program changes. You can be invited to be included on committees, working groups, and in fact, we do have a member on the board of directors of the Canada's Drug Agency. And every second year now, Canada's Drug Agency puts on a symposium, and we're permitted and invited to put in submissions about panels or speakers that we would like to have present at that symposium. So those are other ways that we can become involved with that agency. Okay, so let's take a breath and let me just kind of consolidate where we are so far. If you remember my original chart, we start with drug development. It takes 7 to 10 years. Health Canada then looks at the file that is put in about the clinical trial work that's been done with that drug, and it asks itself the question, is this drug safe and is it effective to be sold in Canada? And if it says yes, then the drug goes to the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board to decide if the price that they want to sell it at is excessive or not. And if it is, then they have to lower that price. At the same time, it goes to the agency that we've just been discussing, Canada's Drug Agency. And the question that it is asking basically is, what is the value of this drug for us to recommend to public reimbursement plans that they add it to their list of drugs that they reimburse? So that's where we are so far in the process. And then we move on to the next part of the process, which is the negotiation of the price. And this is done through another pan-Canadian agency. We've got a lot of agencies. I hope you're noticing we have a lot of agencies in this process. And it's the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. And it was created by the Council of the Federation, which is basically the premiers. And it was really being done until 2022, kind of off the side of each of the province's desks in the ministries of health, which wasn't very satisfactory. So in 2022, it became a standalone, not-for-profit organization. Now, what does it do? It negotiates a price with the manufacturer in order for a drug to be recommended to the provinces to be reimbursed. And negotiations between the PCPA and the drug manufacturer to lower these can include lowering of the price and other conditions that they may wish to put on the drug being reimbursed by the public plans. Now, the PCPA is negotiating on behalf of all the provinces and some federal agencies as well, and they're negotiating together. So the idea is if they negotiate together, they're likely to get a lower price for the drug in the negotiations. We don't know what that negotiation deal actually becomes. There's a letter of intent that's negotiated between the parties, but we don't get to see that. So we don't actually know what's determined there. And the provinces can opt in or out of being involved in negotiations if they wish. So as I've mentioned, once the negotiations are done, we have our letter of intent. You'll note that between 2020 and 2022, CADTH, which is now CDA, reviews have showed that approximately 65% of oncology medicines required price reductions of 70% or more to meet cost effectiveness thresholds. And that's really high. So that's, that can lead to very difficult and sometimes unsuccessful negotiations. This isn't a process that includes patients to this point, although I understand that they may be considering some changes to their practices, which may allow for some engagement by the patients, but we don't have any word on that yet. And as I've said, agreements are confidential. One process that pathway that PCPA has put in place, and it's in line with the time-limited reviews that the Canadian Drug Agency has, is a pilot project that fast lanes approvals. So the negotiations for a drug that has gone through the time-limited reimbursement pathway, hopefully making those drugs fast, the negotiations for the price of those drugs faster. So then what happens? And now I turn over to Colleen to tell us the next step in this long saga of getting drugs to patients.
Yes, thank you, Louise. We're getting toward the end of the process here. We're coming toward the end. So in Canada, after an agreement is reached between the PCPA and the drug manufacturers, each province and territory actually makes their own call, their own decision on whether or not to cover a drug, when to list it, or any special conditions for coverage. Because of that, drug coverage in Canada is often referred to as a patchwork quilt. What you get really depends on where you live. And it's really important to know and for us to reiterate that provinces can opt in or out. So if a price, even if a price is agreed to at the PCPA stage, it doesn't guarantee that the drug will be added to the province's public formulary. So agreeing on a price at the PCPA level is one thing, but listing the drug by a province is a separate decision. When it comes to getting access, a lot of drugs face really long delays at the provincial level, or sometimes they're never covered at all in some regions. And it's also important to know that there's no official way for patients or others to give input during this stage either when it comes to the provincial decisions, though sometimes informal feedback may be considered. To shed a bit more light on this, the organization I work for, LLSC, will soon be releasing a white paper that maps out the full drug access timelines in Canada. So it's going to show the actual number of days for drugs approved within a 5-year period and breaks it down step by step from FDA approval to Health Canada approval, from Health Canada approval to CDA recommendation, and from CDA recommendation to provincial listings, actually in number of days. So very cool, and please stay tuned for that. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Louise to go talk about the private payer landscape.
Thank you. So before we do that, I'd just like you to think back, if you would, to the 5 key principles that we discussed under that are supposed to be part of the healthcare system, which included universality and portability. And as you can see, there certainly isn't universality in terms of people getting access to drugs. Each province is actually covering different drugs, and not always an equal amount of drugs as those in other provinces. So I think there's a real gap between the principles and the practice of our Canada Health Act. Private payers, I'll just take a minute on private payers. Some people, some employers, some unions, and even some individuals will also buy a private insurance plan from a private insurer. And the intention of those plans is to give you more coverage for things than you already have through the public reimbursement plan. And about 24% of people in Canada do have private drug plans, then 61% of those plans include drug coverage. But there are lots of conditions. Every single contract in the private payer system is different, and you really need to read your contract and then make sure you understand what the conditions are under that contract, because some of the plans require you to pre-authorize any payment that they're going to make on a high-cost drug before they'll do it. They'll also some of them will insist on reimbursement for generic drugs, even though the patient may want the patented drug. They may also have caps on the dispensing fees they'll pay, caps on on the yearly maximum that they're willing to pay out for your plan, and lifetime maximums as well. So read carefully. And recently, we've certainly been noticing that private plans have been looking very closely at what the public plans are doing to make their decisions about drug coverage as well under the private plans, which is a bit contrary to the whole intention of having a private plan. So just to put that in your back pocket. So Colleen, what do we have next?
Yeah, we'll go over to our next slide and we'll look at out-of-pocket costs or financial toxicity. So something very important we need to be aware of is the fact that there are usually out-of-pocket costs that patients face even when a drug is technically covered. And that doesn't matter whether it's covered under private coverage or public coverage. These types of extra expenses that aren't, these are the types of extra expenses that aren't covered but are still part of the treatment experience. And we have some examples listed here. So things like travel to your appointments or to treatment, to parking costs, meals during treatment, medical devices like certain diabetic supplies or mobility aids. There are copays and deductibles and other fees, and all of that definitely adds up over time. And these costs can lead to something called financial toxicity. And that's when the financial burden of care starts to negatively affect a person's well-being. And the impact of this is real. I really can't stress that enough. Financial toxicity can lead to patients skipping doses of their medications, not filling their prescriptions, and many people are having to choose between getting treatment and meeting their basic needs like buying food or paying their rent. So this is why it's really important to consider the full picture of access and not just look at whether a drug is covered, but whether people can actually afford to access it or afford to use it. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about financial toxicity, specifically when it comes to cancer care. And something we really need to highlight is this financial burden that cancer patients and their caregivers often face, even in a publicly funded healthcare system. On average, about 20% of cancer-related costs are paid directly out of pocket by patients and their families. So let's just break that down a little bit. So looking at direct costs, these include things both medical and non-medical expenses. So for medical expenses, there are treatments, medications, and devices. And then non-medical expenses include transportation, lodging or accommodations, and even childcare during appointments. And here's the key point, really. Out-of-pocket costs make up the largest share of these direct expenses. And unfortunately, those costs are just expected to keep rising. So what expenses aren't covered? A lot of drugs, devices, and supplements aren't fully covered. And also those extra costs like daycare or travel or accommodations are often excluded from coverage altogether. And then there are indirect costs, which are just as impactful. So we're talking about lost income from taking time off of work, reduced productivity, emotional and psychological stress, and then ultimately a decreased quality of life for patients and also for caregivers. At LLSC, we recently conducted a study on the impact of traveling for treatment for those who had to leave their home city or town to access treatment, and our findings were incredibly powerful. The emotional, the logistical, and financial toll of travel added a whole new layer of hardship. So the results of that study will be published in the near future, and we at LLSC already knew the impacts were huge. But even for us, I mean, this study really just underscored how deep and far reaching these impacts really are. And as for lifetime financial impact, all of this adds up. On average, cancer patients and their caregivers face $32,778 in lifetime out-of-pocket costs related to their care. And that's according to a 2024 special report about the economic impact of cancer in Canada from the Canadian Cancer Society and the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer. So this is all why financial toxicity is such a critical issue in cancer care. It's really not just about access to treatment, but about the long-term impact on people's lives and their livelihoods. Louise, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you. So as you've probably gathered from this presentation, and I think some of you knew it coming in, there are profound delays and gaps in access throughout both our public and our private systems, and primarily our public systems. So many drugs face long delays at the provincial level, particularly, and some of them are never publicly covered in some regions, which is really contrary to the principles of the Canada Health Act. So it takes approximately, on average, 732 days from the time Health Canada approves a drug for sale for access in this country to actually access to drugs through public drug plans. And that's a profoundly long period of time. So maybe you could just put for us in the chat one of the barriers you or someone you know has faced when trying to access medication. Be interesting to see what the ones are that you've come across. Cost prohibitive, absolutely. Okay. So we're getting to wrapping up, but complicated, absolutely. So, oh no, yep, there we are. So it wouldn't be a presentation by me about the health system without a discussion of social determinants of health. Those of you who know me know that it's something that I talk about all the time, and for good reason. We know that health outcomes are directly impacted by people's access to social determinants of health. We know that. So what are these social determinants of health? Some of them are individual. For instance, your age and your sex may indeed be a social determinant of health. You may get less because of your age. You may be treated in a discriminatory way because of your sex, and those will impact your health outcomes. Also, there are other factors like social and community networks. We know that people who have good networks, social networks, do better than people who do not. And then there are those that are general socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental conditions, and they include education, your work environment, your living and working conditions, whether you're unemployed or underemployed, what your salary is, whether you have good access to water and sanitation, whether you have good access to healthcare services, whether you have housing or are unhoused or underhoused. All of these will impact your ability to have good health outcomes. And we also know that as well, racism is a social determinant of health that we're really a lot of people are really experiencing as well. So just before we go to the last slide, we'll go to the last slide now. But before we do that, we want to do another poll as to what extent do you think social determinants of health impact your overall health? To what extent? If you don't want to put it on the on the screen, please feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, I don't know if we have any.
To see the poll results once the poll closes.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. All right. So 44% of you thought that it had a major, social determinants had a major impact on your health. 44% also felt that they play a role in my health, but not the biggest one. 13% said they have some influence, but it's minimal. So 88% of you recognize the importance of social determinants of health as really a fairly important part of the likelihood of you having good health outcomes. So let's look at what research has said. And so in our last slide on this topic, we have a research study that was done by Renfrew County, that's a county in Ontario, their district health unit. And so what did they find? What makes people sick? And they found that 50% of it is really related to social determinants of health, including your income, your early childhood development, disabilities, education, social exclusion, social safety nets, gender, employment, working conditions, race, Aboriginal status, safe and nutritious food, housing, homelessness, and community belonging and social networks. 50%. 32, so 25% then are direct access to healthcare services and the healthcare system in a time, and wait times, of course, we know. 15% based on biology and genetics, and 10% your environment, the external environment, which includes air quality and civic infrastructure. So that's I think some of you might find that a surprising result. I did when I saw it the first time. It really shows how important those social determinants of health are, and it links very directly to Colleen's comments about financial toxicity. The less you have access to social determinants of health, the less you can pay for those factors that are not covered, like travel and parking and hospitals and all of those other, even if food in a hospital, all of those expenses that are not covered by the healthcare system. So this, Colleen, bring us home for this one.
Perfect. So if we could go to the next slide. Perfect. So as we wrap up, we'd like to let you know that you will be receiving a feedback form shortly following this session, and your input is incredibly valuable to us. So please take a moment to fill out the form and share your thoughts. This is the contact information for Louise and I, but it also would have been in your registration email. So don't worry about trying to take a quick snapshot of this. Thank you again for joining us. We hope you learned a lot, and we look forward to seeing you in our future sessions. Our next session we're putting on will actually walk you through creating an HTA submission. So what does that look like from start to finish for anyone who hasn't participated in that process? And for anyone who has and wants to see how I do it, you're welcome to come. And the date for that will be announced soon. So take a look for that registration invitation coming in your inbox. Before we go to the next slide, where we're just going to thank our sponsors, there's a question in the chat here.
Oh.
And a person who lives in one province go to another province to get medication that's not available in their own province. This is a great question. And really, it kind of depends on the treatment and the case, because I'll give you an example. So for CAR T treatment, there are, I want to say 7, but don't quote me on that, centers across the country that offer CAR T treatment. So if that's a treatment that you're in need of, often people are leaving their provinces and coming across the country. We've talked to people who've come from BC to Ontario, to Ottawa specifically for that treatment, or from the Atlantic. But then there are people who have actually had to relocate to a province to access a drug. And all of the provincial formularies and who's eligible for those looks a little bit different. An example of that is in Ontario, we have OHIP, and you're actually eligible for OHIP the minute that you have an Ontario residence. So once you're recognized as an Ontario resident, you have a place of residence here, you are considered to be eligible for OHIP. Whereas in BC, there's a 3-month waiting period. So if you were to relocate to BC to get a treatment, you would have to wait out that 3-month period before you're eligible for their drug plan in BC. So things look a little bit differently. It's very nuanced, but that's the best answer that I can give to that question right now.
Yeah, and I certainly hear a lot from Kath Bernard at Save Your Skin, who looks after trying to find treatments for people, that she's constantly looking for treatments for people in provinces other than where they live, and even in some cases in other countries, because we can't get them anywhere in Canada. So this is a serious problem. And I go back to the principles of the Canada Health Act, which I think are being broken pretty much every day across the country. So last but not least.
Sorry, there is one more question in the chat.
Oh,
And I'm actually not able to answer this question because I'm not aware of this. So the question says, I understand that in the Ontario government, there is a committee to evaluate drugs. The mandate of this organization is to review drug submissions that are not eligible for review through the CDA reimbursement review process. Can you help us understand why some drug reviews are not eligible through CDA? That's not something that I can speak to. I'm not sure, Louise, if you know about that. And if not, we will do our best to find you the answer to this question. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I do know that there is a provincial group that looks and makes recommendations to the province about which drugs should be included on their drug lists and which aren't, but I wasn't aware of this particular problem with that organization. So we'll have to take that one back. There's always something new to learn. So this is a new one for us as well. But we will definitely find the answer and get back to you.
So now we can move to the next slide.
And really, in a sense, in some ways, the most important slide, which is a thank you to all the sponsors who've allowed us to put on this webinar, including GlaxoSmithKline, Janssen, AbbVie, Amgen, Bayer, and Merck. And last but not least, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us on this, at least where I live, muggy July day. So thanks so much. We're around if you want us. People know how to find us.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody. Take care.